There are moments when the world stops turning, when hundreds of eyes witness something so horrifying, so unthinkable, that their screams blend into one terrible chorus. September 23rd, 2014. Delhi Zoo. A sunny afternoon that should have been filled with laughter and ice cream. Instead, it became a stage for nature's most brutal truth. A man named Maqsood stood alone in a pit with a 400-pound white tiger named Vijay, and the crowd above could do nothing but watch. This is not a story about an evil animal. This is not a tale of human stupidity. This is something far more tragic. This is about the thin line between safety and chaos, about a split second that changed everything, about a creature doing what it was born to do, and about a man who never stood a chance. What you're about to hear will disturb you. It will make you question how fragile life really is, how quickly everything can be torn away, how a normal day can turn into a nightmare that thousands of people will carry with them forever. This is the story of Maqsood's last day on Earth, and it begins long before he ever stepped foot in that zoo. Maqsood was not a wealthy man. He was 22 years old, thin as a rail, with dark eyes that always seemed to be searching for something just out of reach. He lived in Anand Parbat, a cramped neighborhood in West Delhi where the walls were stained with years of monsoon rains and the streets smelled of fried food and diesel fumes. His family was small. His father had died years ago, leaving behind nothing but debts and broken promises. His mother worked as a housemaid, scrubbing floors in homes she could never afford to live in. Her hands were rough, her back was bent, and her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 disappointments. Maqsood had 2 younger brothers who looked up to him like he was some kind of hero, even though he had no job, no education beyond 10th grade, no clear future. But to them, he was everything. He was the one who brought home food when their mother couldn't. He was the one who told them stories at night when the electricity went out. He was the one who promised them that life would get better, even when he didn't believe it himself. But Maqsood had dreams, big, impossible dreams that kept him awake at night. He wanted to be someone. He wanted his mother to stop bending her back for strangers. He wanted his brothers to have new shoes, new books, a new life. He wanted people to know his name, to remember him as someone who mattered. But in a city of 20 million souls, how do you stand out? How do you become more than just another face in the crowd? He spent his days wandering the city, picking up odd jobs here and there, painting walls for 50 rupees, carrying bricks at construction sites, cleaning shops that smelled of incense and sweat. He was a drifter in his own city, invisible to most people. Just another young man with calloused hands and empty pockets. But inside he carried a strange restlessness, a feeling that life owed him something bigger, something that would make people remember his name. People who knew Maqsood said he was quiet but not shy. He had a way of staring at things for too long, like he was trying to memorize them. His friends from the neighborhood said he could sit for hours watching birds on the rooftops or stray dogs fighting over scraps. He loved animals. As a child, he would bring home wounded creatures trying to nurse them back to health, stray dogs with broken legs, birds with damaged wings. Once he even brought home a baby monkey he found abandoned near a temple. His mother would scold him, telling him they barely had enough food for themselves, but he didn't care. He felt connected to these creatures in a way he couldn't explain. They didn't judge him. They didn't ask him why he had no money, no job, no plans. They just existed wild and free, and he admired that. His mother worried about him. She saw something in his eyes that frightened her, a kind of sadness that had no name. She would wake up in the middle of the night and find him sitting on the roof staring at the stars, lost in thoughts he never shared. She wanted to ask him what was wrong, but she was afraid of the answer. Afraid that her son was slipping away from her, disappearing into some dark place she couldn't reach. On that September morning, Maqsood woke up in his tiny room with sunlight cutting through the broken blinds. His mother was already gone to work. His brothers were still asleep, tangled in thin sheets, their faces peaceful and innocent. He had no plans, no appointments, no one waiting for him anywhere. The day stretched ahead of him like an empty road. so he decided to go to the zoo, the National Zoological Park in Delhi, a place where he could escape the noise of his life, where he could stand in front of cages and imagine what it would be like to be untamed, unburdened, unafraid. He ate a simple breakfast of bread and tea. He told his brothers he'd be back before dark. He took the bus, standing in the aisle because all the seats were taken, watching the city slide by through grimy windows. He paid his 20 rupees at the entrance gate and walked through the iron doors into a world that felt separate from everything else. He didn't know that this decision would be his last. He didn't know that in a few hours his name would be on every news channel in the country. He didn't know that he was walking toward his own death, one slow step at a time. The white tiger is not a separate species. It is a genetic anomaly, a twist of nature that turns a Bengal tiger's orange fur into a ghostly cream white, striped with charcoal black. Their eyes are ice blue, piercing and cold. In the wild, white tigers are rare, almost mythical. Some say they bring good luck, others call them ghosts of the jungle. But in truth, they are just tigers with a different coat, no more magical or mysterious than any other predator. In captivity, they are bred intentionally, displayed like living jewels, because people will pay to see something so beautiful, so unusual, so dangerously majestic. Zoos around the world keep white tigers as crown attractions. Children press their faces against the glass, pointing and gasping. Adults snap photos trying to capture that impossible beauty. But what they don't see is the creature beneath the beauty, the predator with instincts carved into its DNA over millions of years of evolution. Vijay was one of these rare creatures. He was born in captivity, raised behind bars, fed on schedule, watched by thousands. He had never hunted in a forest. He had never felt the thrill of stalking prey through tall grass. He had never tasted the hot blood of a fresh kill. But deep in his DNA, coded into every muscle and nerve, was the instinct of a killer. 400 pounds of pure predator, jaws strong enough to crush the skull of a buffalo, claws sharp enough to tear through flesh like paper. A body built for one purpose: to hunt, to dominate, to survive. Vijay's enclosure was designed to mimic his natural habitat, but it was still a prison. A deep pit with rocky walls, a small pool of water for drinking and cooling off, scattered bushes for shade, and a raised platform where he could sleep in the sun. The walls were 18 feet high, too high for a human to climb out, too high for a tiger to jump out, but just right for someone to fall in. The enclosure had been inspected multiple times. Engineers had measured the height, tested the barriers, declared it safe. But safety is always relative. Safe for whom? For the visitors who stand behind the railing? Yes. For the tiger who lives in the pit? Yes. But for someone who falls? For someone who crosses that invisible line between spectator and prey? No, not safe at all. Zoo officials knew the danger. They had signs everywhere. Do not cross the barrier. Keep a safe distance. No leaning over the edge. Danger, wild animals. But people are curious. People are foolish. People think that a fence is enough to keep death at bay. They think that because they've paid for a ticket, because they're in a public place, because there are security guards somewhere, they're protected. But protection is an illusion. One slip, one moment of carelessness, and the illusion shatters. Vijay had lived in that enclosure for years. He was used to the noise, the crowds, the children banging on the glass. He was fed chunks of meat every evening, tossed down by keepers who never got too close, who understood that familiarity breeds complacency, and complacency breeds accidents. He had never attacked anyone. He had never shown aggression toward humans. He was just a tiger, living his captive life, pacing the same worn paths day after day, sleeping in the same spots, drinking from the same pool, waiting for nothing in particular. Some keepers said Vijay was gentle for a tiger, that he was calm, predictable, safe. But other keepers, the ones who had worked with big cats for decades, knew better. They knew that there's no such thing as a safe tiger, that every moment of calm is just a pause between potential violence, that a tiger is always a tiger, no matter how long it's been in a cage. Until Maqsood fell into his world. The zoo was busy that Tuesday afternoon. It was a perfect day for an outing. Clear sky, warm sun, a light breeze that carried the smell of flowers from the botanical section. Families with children moved in clusters, pointing at elephants and giraffes. College students bunked classes to wander the paths, holding hands and taking selfies. Elderly couples walked slowly, holding each other for support, reminiscing about when they brought their own children here decades ago. The air smelled like popcorn and roasted peanuts. Vendors sold cold drinks and ice cream from carts painted in bright colors. The sound of monkey screeches and peacock calls mixed with the chatter of 1,000 voices. It was ordinary. It was pleasant. It was exactly the kind of day when tragedy feels impossible. Maqsood walked alone, hands in his pockets, moving from cage to cage with no real destination. He watched the bears rolling in the dirt. He stood before the lion enclosure, admiring the massive male with his thick mane. He paused at the crocodile pool, where the reptiles lay motionless as statues pretending to be logs. He felt calm here. In the zoo, surrounded by creatures in cages, he felt less trapped than he did in his own life. He stopped at the white tiger enclosure around 3 in the afternoon. A crowd had already gathered, pressing against the railing, pointing and clicking photos. Vijay was lying on his platform, lazy and indifferent, his tail flicking occasionally at flies. His white fur gleamed in the sunlight, almost glowing against the dark rocks. He looked peaceful, majestic, harmless. Maqsood stared at him. He had seen tigers before, but never a white one. Never something so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. He felt drawn to it, pulled by something he couldn't name. Maybe it was admiration. Maybe it was envy. Maybe it was the desire to touch something wild, something that lived beyond the rules and boundaries that trapped him. He moved closer to the railing, then closer still. The barrier was low, just a metal railing meant to keep people a few feet back from the edge. But it wasn't locked. It wasn't electric. It wasn't even very sturdy. It was just a suggestion, a gentle reminder. Most people respected it, but Maqsood wanted a better view. He leaned over it, gripping the metal, stretching his body forward to see more clearly. His heart was pounding. He felt something strange, a pull, a curiosity mixed with adrenaline. Other visitors glanced at him, some frowning, some shaking their heads. A woman with a child said something to her husband about people being careless, but no one stopped him. No one grabbed his arm and pulled him back. And then, in one terrible moment, he lost his balance. Some witnesses said he slipped. Others said he was leaning too far and the railing gave way. A few claimed he jumped on purpose, though no one could explain why. One man insisted he saw Maqsood climb over deliberately, as if he wanted to go down there. But the truth doesn't matter. What matters is that Maqsood fell. 18 feet down, tumbling through the air, his arms flailing, his mouth open in a silent scream. He hit the ground hard. The impact was sickening. People heard it, that awful thud of flesh and bone hitting dirt and stone. Maqsood lay there for a moment, stunned, gasping for air. Pain exploded through his body. His leg was twisted at a wrong angle. His shoulder felt dislocated. His face was scraped and bleeding. He tried to move, tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't obey. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. Children started crying. Everyone rushed to the edge, looking down in horror. Parents covered their children's eyes. But it was too late. Everyone had seen him fall. Everyone knew what came next. Maqsood rolled onto his side, groaning, trying to understand what had just happened. He looked up and saw hundreds of faces staring down at him, mouths open, eyes wide with fear. He looked around and realized where he was. In the pit. In the tiger's home. And he screamed one word that would echo in the nightmares of everyone who heard it. Help! But no one moved. Because 10 feet away, Vijay was standing now. The tiger had been startled awake by the sound of the fall. His ears were forward. His muscles were tense. His blue eyes were locked on Maqsood. And in that instant, something ancient awoke inside him. Something that recognized the situation immediately. Pray. Time does strange things in moments of terror. For Maqsood, those seconds must have felt like hours. He tried to crawl backward, dragging his broken leg, leaving a smear of blood on the dirt. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. His hands clawed at the ground, searching for something, anything to pull himself away. But there was nowhere to go. The walls were too high. The distance to safety was impossible. The crowd above was screaming now, a chorus of panic and horror. "Someone help him! Call the keepers! Throw something! Do something!" But fear had frozen them in place. No one jumped in, no one climbed down, because they all knew what would happen if they did. They'd seen enough nature documentaries. They understood that entering that pit meant entering a death trap. One man tried to throw his jacket down, thinking maybe it would distract the tiger. The jacket fluttered through the air and landed harmlessly a few feet away. VJ didn't even glance at it. Another person threw a water bottle. It bounced off the rocks and rolled into the pool. Useless. Everything was useless. Vijay moved slowly, almost cautiously. He didn't charge. He didn't roar. He just walked, one massive paw in front of the other, like he was approaching something he didn't quite understand. His nose twitched. His whiskers quivered. He could smell the blood. He could hear the fear. He could sense the weakness. This was not a deliberate hunt. VJ wasn't hungry. He had been fed the previous evening. This was something else. This was curiosity. This was the instinct to investigate something unusual in his territory. This was a predator responding to the presence of vulnerable prey. Maqsood stopped crawling. He pressed himself against the wall, his back flat against the stone, his arms raised in front of his face like a child hiding from a nightmare. He was sobbing now, his voice breaking. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the blood and dirt. "Please, please, someone help me, please don't let me die, please." Above him, people were crying too. Mothers turned away, unable to watch. Men shouted for security, for zookeepers, for anyone with authority. But in those critical seconds, no one with the power to help was near enough. The keepers were on the other side of the zoo. The security guards were managing other crowds. The emergency protocols that should have kicked in immediately were too slow, too bureaucratic, too human. And time was running out. The tiger stopped 3 feet away. He tilted his head, studying this strange creature that had invaded his space. His ears swiveled back and forth, picking up the sounds of Maqsood's sobbing and the crowd screaming. For a moment, just a brief, fragile moment, there was a chance. A possibility that VJ would lose interest, that he would walk away, that curiosity would fade and the tiger would return to his platform to sleep. But then Maqsood screamed again, a high-pitched, desperate wail that tore through the air. And that sound, that primal expression of terror, triggered something ancient in VJ's brain. The instinct that says, wounded prey makes noise. Wounded prey cannot run. Wounded prey is easy. Wounded prey is food. VJ lunged. The attack was swift and brutal. VJ covered the distance in a single bound, his powerful legs propelling 400 pounds of muscle and fury straight at Maqsood. His jaws opened wide, revealing 4-inch canines designed to pierce through hide and muscle. He clamped down on Maqsood's neck, and the crowd's screams turned into a single unified shriek of horror. Maqsood's body went rigid, his back arched, his hands grabbed at the tiger's fur, pulling weakly, uselessly. His legs kicked once, twice, then went still. Blood poured from the wound, dark and fast, pooling in the dirt beneath him. The tiger's grip was unbreakable. This was how tigers killed in the wild. A bite to the neck that severed the spine or crushed the windpipe. Death in seconds, maybe minutes, but it felt like forever. VJ began dragging him across the enclosure, moving with the ease of a creature that had done this 1,000 times in his genetic memory. Maqsood's body was limp now, no longer fighting, no longer struggling. His arms dragged behind him. His legs scraped along the ground, leaving twin trails of red in the dirt. The tiger pulled him toward the bushes, toward the shadows, toward a place where predators go to eat in peace. People were sobbing, vomiting, turning away, but most couldn't stop watching. It was horrible and mesmerizing, a primal scene from a world that existed long before cities and zoos and safety barriers. Some filmed it on their phones, their hands shaking so badly the videos came out blurred and chaotic. Children were covering their eyes, screaming for their parents. Parents were pulling them back, trying to shield them from the sight. But it was too late. The image was burned into everyone's mind forever. A zookeeper finally arrived, running at full speed, his uniform soaked with sweat, his face pale with panic. His name was Ramesh, and he had worked at the zoo for 15 years. He had dealt with escaped monkeys, aggressive rhinos, even a leopard that once climbed out of its enclosure. But he had never dealt with this. He grabbed a long bamboo stick from a nearby storage area and started banging it against the metal railing, shouting at Vijay in Hindi. "Chaudu! Chaudu! Let go! Let go!" But the tiger ignored him. Vijay had a grip on his prey and nothing would make him let go. His instincts had taken over completely. This was no longer the calm, captive tiger that lazed in the sun. This was a wild predator, acting on programming millions of years old. Another keeper appeared with a fire extinguisher, spraying foam into the pit, aiming for the tiger's face. The white mist filled the air, creating a surreal, ghostly scene. But Vijay just shook his head and tightened his jaws. Maqsood's body twitched once, a final reflex, a last signal from a dying nervous system, and then went completely still. The zoo authorities scrambled. Someone called for a tranquilizer gun. Someone else called the police. Someone else called the director, who was in a meeting downtown. But it all took time. Time to locate the veterinarian who had the tranquilizer equipment. Time to prepare the dart with the correct dosage. Time to get to the enclosure. Time that Maqsood didn't have. Security guards formed a perimeter, pushing the crowd back, trying to create space for the emergency response. But people didn't want to leave. They were trapped between horror and fascination, unable to look away from the scene unfolding below. News of the attack had already spread through the zoo. Visitors from other areas came running to see what was happening. Within minutes, over 1,000 people surrounded the white tiger enclosure, creating a massive, chaotic audience for this terrible tragedy. When the veterinarian finally arrived with the tranquilizer rifle, 20 long minutes had passed. 20 minutes of Maqsood lying motionless in Vijay's jaws. 20 minutes of the crowd watching, helpless and horrified. The vet loaded the dart, aimed carefully to avoid hitting Maqsood's body, and fired. The dart struck Vijay in the shoulder. The tiger jerked, released his grip for a moment, then grabbed Maqsood again, as if afraid his prey would escape. It took another 5 minutes for the tranquilizer to take effect. Slowly, Vijay's movements became sluggish. His eyes began to glaze. His powerful muscles relaxed. He released Maqsood's body and stumbled backward, confused and drowsy. He tried to walk toward his pool, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He collapsed onto his side, breathing heavily, sedated but alive. Only then did the keepers feel safe enough to enter the pit. When the keepers finally climbed into the enclosure, using a ladder that had been rushed to the scene, they knew it was over. Maqsood's body lay in a crumpled heap near the bushes. His neck was torn open, exposing muscle and bone. His clothes were soaked in blood. His face was pale, drained of life. His eyes were still open, staring up at the sky, seeing nothing. Ramesh, the senior keeper, approached slowly. He had seen death before. Animals died in zoos all the time, despite the best care. But this was different. This was a human being, someone's son, someone's brother, someone who had woken up that morning with no idea that these would be his last hours on Earth. He knelt beside the body and checked for a pulse, pressing his fingers against Maqsood's wrist. He already knew there wouldn't be one, but protocol demanded that he check. He waited, holding his breath, hoping for a miracle. But there was nothing, just cold skin and stillness. He looked up at the other keepers standing around him and slowly shook his head. "He's gone." Those two words hung in the air. Final, irreversible. The other keepers bowed their heads. One of them, a younger man who had only worked at the zoo for 6 months, turned away and vomited into the bushes. This was not what he had signed up for. This was not the job he had imagined. An ambulance arrived minutes later, sirens wailing, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the crowd. Paramedics climbed into the pit with a stretcher, but they moved without urgency. There was no point in rushing now. They lifted Maqsood's body carefully, respectfully, and covered him with a white sheet. Blood immediately began seeping through the fabric, creating dark red stains that spread slowly outward. They carried him out through a side gate, away from the main crowd, but everyone knew what was happening. People watched in silence as the stretcher disappeared into the ambulance. Some made the sign of the cross. Others pressed their hands together in prayer. Many just stood there, numb with shock, trying to process what they had witnessed. The news crews had already arrived. Reporters set up cameras outside the zoo gates, shouting questions at anyone who would listen. What happened? How did he fall? Why didn't anyone help? Is the tiger going to be put down? The zoo director issued a brief statement, his voice shaking, promising a full investigation. But investigations don't bring back the dead. Inside the enclosure, Vijay lay unconscious in the corner, his white fur stained with Maqsood's blood. Dark red patches covered his muzzle and chest. He looked like a creature from a nightmare, but he didn't understand what he had done wrong. In his mind, shaped by millions of years of evolution, he had simply responded to a threat in his territory. He had acted on instinct. He was just a tiger doing what tigers do. But in the eyes of the public, he was now a killer. The autopsy was performed that evening at a government hospital. The medical examiner, Dr. Sharma, had seen countless bodies in his 30-year career. Car accidents, murders, suicides, industrial accidents. But this was his first tiger attack. He worked methodically, documenting every wound, every injury, every detail that would be needed for the official report. The findings confirmed what everyone already knew. Maqsood had died from massive blood loss and a crushed trachea. His neck had been broken by the force of Vijay's bite. The tiger's canines had punctured his jugular vein and carotid artery, causing catastrophic bleeding. He had multiple lacerations across his body, defensive wounds on his arms where he had tried to protect himself in those final seconds. His left leg had been shattered in the fall, and his shoulder was dislocated. Dr. Sharma noted in his report that death had likely come within the first 2 minutes of the attack. The combination of spinal injury and blood loss would have caused rapid unconsciousness, which meant that Maqsood had spent his final moments in unimaginable pain and terror. But at least he hadn't suffered for long. It was a small mercy in a situation without mercy. The body was released to the family the next morning. Maqsood's mother had to be sedated before she could even enter the morgue. When she finally saw her son's body, covered except for his face, she collapsed. Her screams echoed through the hospital corridors. Nurses tried to comfort her. But how do you comfort a mother who has lost her child in such a horrific way? His brothers stood in silence, unable to cry, unable to speak. The older of the two, 16-year-old Irfan, kept repeating the same question. Why did he go there? Why didn't he just stay home? But there was no answer. There would never be an answer that made sense. The funeral was held that afternoon, according to Islamic tradition. Hundreds of people from the neighborhood attended, filling the narrow streets around the small mosque. Many had barely known Maqsood, but they came anyway, drawn by the tragedy, by the need to witness and mourn something that felt too big to process alone. His mother was too weak to attend. She stayed at home, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, whispering her son's name over and over. The media coverage was relentless. News channels played the story on repeat, showing blurred footage of the attack, interviewing witnesses, debating who was to blame. Some said the zoo was at fault for having weak barriers. Others said Maqsood was reckless, that he had ignored the warning signs, that he had basically committed suicide. A few even suggested he was mentally unstable, though there was no evidence of that. He was just a young man who made a terrible mistake. Animal rights activists descended on the zoo, demanding that Vijay be spared. They held protests outside the gates, carrying signs that read, "Tigers are not criminals and don't punish nature." They argued that Vijay was an animal acting on instinct, that he couldn't be held morally responsible for what he had done. "You can't punish him for being what he is," they said. "He didn't choose to be in a cage. He didn't choose to have a human fall into his space. He just reacted." But others wanted the tiger euthanized. They called into radio shows, posted angry comments online, demanded justice. "He's tasted human blood," they argued. "He knows we're easy prey now. He'll do it again. He's too dangerous to keep." Some even showed up at the zoo demanding to see VJ destroyed, as if his death would somehow balance the scales. The debate raged for weeks. Politicians weighed in. Celebrities shared their opinions. Religious leaders offered their perspectives. But in the end, the decision came down to zoo officials and wildlife experts. After careful evaluation, they determined that VJ had not shown inherent aggression. He had responded to an abnormal situation. He could be safely housed with proper precautions. VJ was spared. He was moved to a more secure enclosure, far from public view, with higher walls and better barriers. He was monitored closely for months, observed for any signs of aggression or behavioral changes. But he showed none. He returned to his normal routine, sleeping, eating, pacing his familiar paths. He lived for several more years, growing old and slow, his white fur yellowing with age. He never attacked anyone again. He died peacefully in his sleep in 2019, 5 years after Maqsood's death. But the memory of that day never faded. Years later, the white tiger enclosure at Delhi Zoo still stands, though it's been significantly renovated. The barriers are higher now, reinforced with steel and concrete. The warning signs are bigger, more explicit, with graphic images showing what can happen if you lean too far. Security cameras monitor every angle. Guards patrol regularly. The zoo takes safety seriously now in a way it perhaps didn't before. But every so often, a visitor will stop and stare into the pit, now occupied by a different tiger, and imagine what happened there. Imagine a young man falling, screaming, dying in front of 1,000 helpless witnesses. Some visitors are too young to remember. Others only know the story from news reports or YouTube videos. But the older generation, those who were there that day, carry it with them like a scar. Maqsood's family never recovered. How could they? His mother stopped working shortly after his death. She couldn't function. She spent her days sitting by the window, staring out at nothing, waiting for a son who would never come home. She died 3 years later, in 2017. The doctors said it was heart failure, but everyone who knew her understood that she had died of grief. His brothers grew up haunted by the way their older brother died. Irfan dropped out of school and started working at a factory to support what was left of the family. He never married, never found peace. The younger brother, Asif, left Delhi entirely, moving to Mumbai to escape the whispers and the pitying stares. But you can't escape a tragedy like that. It follows you wherever you go. The zoo paid the family compensation, a sum of several lakh rupees that was supposed to help them rebuild their lives. It was processed through lawyers and courts, taking months to arrive. They used some of it to pay off debts. Some went to the funeral expenses. The rest was saved, though no amount of money could ever compensate for a life lost so brutally. The witnesses who saw the attack struggled too. Many reported nightmares, flashbacks, symptoms of post-traumatic stress. A woman named Priya, who had been visiting the zoo with her daughter, said she couldn't sleep for weeks without seeing Maqsood's face, hearing his screams. A college student named Rahul said he dropped out that semester because he couldn't concentrate, couldn't stop thinking about how helpless they all were. A retired school teacher named Mrs. Kapoor said she never returned to the zoo, couldn't even look at pictures of tigers without feeling sick. Several psychologists published papers about the incident, analyzing it as a case of collective trauma. They talked about how witnessing violence, even against strangers, creates lasting psychological scars. They discussed the unique horror of watching someone die slowly while being unable to help. They recommended counseling for anyone who had been present that day, but most people never sought it. They tried to forget, to move on, to pretend it hadn't affected them. But trauma doesn't work that way. So what is the lesson here? Is it that zoos are dangerous, that animals are unpredictable, that we should respect the boundaries between their world and ours? Maybe. Those are all true, but they're too simple. They don't capture the full weight of what happened. Maybe the real lesson is about the fragility of life, how everything we are, everything we hope to be, can end in a single moment. Maqsood woke up that morning with plans and dreams. He wanted to help his family. He wanted to be someone. He went to the zoo to see something beautiful, to escape his troubles for a few hours. And he died there, alone in a pit, torn apart by a creature that didn't hate him, didn't even know him, but simply acted according to its nature. Or maybe the lesson is about the illusion of control. We build barriers and write rules and post warning signs, and we convince ourselves that we're safe, that we've tamed the wild world, domesticated it, made it fit for human enjoyment. But that's a lie. The wild is always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when we let our guard down. Or maybe the lesson is darker still. Maybe it's that death doesn't care about your dreams, your family, your plans for the future. Death doesn't negotiate. It doesn't give second chances. It doesn't consider whether you deserve it or not. One moment of curiosity, one slip, one fall, and everything you are, everything you could have been, is erased in less time than it takes to scream for help. Maqsood went to the zoo to escape his troubles. He wanted to see something beautiful, something that made him feel small and insignificant in a way that was comforting rather than crushing. Instead, he became part of a story that will be told forever. A warning, a tragedy, a reminder that some lines should never be crossed, even accidentally. And somewhere, carved into a simple gravestone in a crowded Delhi cemetery, is his name, Maqsood. Born 1992, died 2014, 22 years old, gone too soon, remembered by those who loved him, forgotten by the tiger that killed him, because tigers don't remember. They don't feel guilt, they don't lie awake at night wondering what they've done. They just exist, wild and deadly and innocent, exactly as nature made them. And that perhaps is the most terrifying lesson of all.